Hey guys, welcome back to our channel. My name is Peyton Hawes. This is my husband Colin Hawes, and we are ex-Mormons reacting to a certain section of the CES letter. Today we'll be going over the section Prophets and just reading through it and sharing our thoughts and opinions around it. Actually, I was gonna have Colin explain what the CES letter is, but we've done that in previous ones, and I feel like most people who are watching this probably either seen some of our previous ones or are familiar with the CES letter in some. If not, just Google it really quick. You can find information about it super fast. I do have a playlist with all of our CES letter videos that we've created. I have a faith crisis playlist that also has all of the CES letter videos in it, but it's just kind of because it goes in line with faith crisis stuff. But if you only want to see the CES letter videos and you want to watch some of the previous ones that we've done prior to this one, that playlist will be in the cards and in the description box below.
Sure, yeah. So today we did polygamy, I think was the last one, and today is prophets. So it's going to talk a little bit about reliability and like some contradictions between prophets. So it's an interesting section. So like all the other sections, he starts out with a few quotes. There's one here from Wilford Woodruff. "The Lord will never permit me or any other man who stands as president of the church to lead you astray. It is not in the program. It is not in the mind of God. If I were to attempt that, the Lord would remove me out of my place."
So this next quote is, just heard Hudson scream. He's probably either pretending to be a guitar or he's singing, "Please stay." Okay, this quote is from Elder M. Russell Ballard from his talk Stay in the Boat and Hold On in October 2014 conference. He says, "Keep the eyes of the mission on the leaders of the church. We will not and cannot lead you astray." And then the next one is in one of the Gospel Topics essays on what used to be called LDS.org, that's now churchofjesuschrist.org, under the essay Race and the Priesthood. And this quote says, "Today the church disavows the theories advanced in the past that black skin is a sign of divine disfavor or curse, or that it reflects unrighteous actions in premortal life."
I just want to say some of these quotes that are choices were very well selected, because we have one that's quite a bit older from Wilford Woodruff, and then we have one recently basically saying the same thing, that the president and the leaders of the church cannot lead the church or its members astray. And then you immediately have a quote from one of their 2013 Gospel Talks essays basically saying we're disavowing teachings from previous leaders of the church. So
yeah, and I'll say, like, with my upbringing in the church, I was taught that everything that comes out of the mouth of the prophet is coming from God. That basically the prophet is a shell of a human while God's spirit is within him, speaking to the congregation and to the church and what he needs for the world or for us or whatever the case may be. And so anytime we had general conference, which was just like a huge meeting that happens twice a year, where everybody from in the world tunes in and listens to what the prophets and apostles and other people high up in the church have to say, and just like they provide talks which are kind of like lessons or like sermons in a way. And my family and a lot of other families would make kind of a big deal out of it. Everybody does like a big breakfast a lot of times, and the whole family like gets together and watches on TV. And some people go in person in Salt Lake City, Utah, where you could actually be there. But I lived in California, so we couldn't do that. But we all watch on TV, and my mom would print out stuff to try and get kids to pay attention, where it would like have different prophets, and you color his tie, like whatever tie he's wearing on there, or different apostles or prophets or whatever, whoever's speaking, and then just like something they said that you liked. And it was just a way to get us to pay pay more attention. But you know, sometimes people get tired and fall asleep because this is lasting like 4 hours throughout the day, usually with like a little break. And sometimes you're up in the kitchen and you're getting food or you have to go to the bathroom. But when the prophet is getting on to speak, no one goes to the bathroom. You freaking go to the bathroom before the prophet's gonna get on. No one go to the kitchen. Everyone better be up from a nap. You're waking up people. Look at the screen. Listen, because God is speaking to us through the prophet. Not everybody was taught it in that extreme of a way, but I was.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people were.
And there's going to be quotes later on in this section that kind of support why you would have been taught that if the prophet is speaking, it might as well be God speaking. Like, we're going to get into that.
Okay.
So the first section here is just called Adam God. So President Brigham Young taught what is now known as Adam God theory. He taught that Adam is, quote, our Father and our God, and the only God with whom we have to do. Brigham not only taught this doctrine over the pulpit in conferences in 1852 and 1854, but he also introduced this doctrine as the lecture at the veil in the endowment ceremony of the temple. Brigham also published this doctrine in the Deseret News on June 18, 1873. And it has the quote from that publication. How much unbelief exists in the minds of Latter-day Saints in regard to one particular doctrine which I revealed to them and which God revealed to me, namely that Adam is our Father and God. I do not know, I do not inquire, I care nothing about it. Our father Adam helped to make this earth. It was created expressly for him, and after it was made, he and his companions came here. He brought one of his wives with him, and she was called Eve because she was the first woman upon the earth. Our father Adam is the man who stands at the gate and holds the keys of everlasting life and salvation to all his children who have or whoever will come upon the earth. I have been found fault with by the ministers of religion because I have said that they were ignorant, but I could not find any man on the earth who could tell me this, although it is one of the simplest things in the world, until I met and talked with Joseph Smith.
Contrary to the teachings of Brigham Young, subsequent prophets and apostles have since renounced the Adam God theory as false doctrine. President Spencer W. Kimball renounced the Adam God theory in the October 1976 General Conference. And here's the quote. We warn you against the dissemination, did I say that right?
Mm-hmm.
We warn you against the dissemination of doctrines which are not according to the scriptures and which are alleged to have been taught by some of the general authorities of past generations. Such, for instance, is the Adam God theory. We denounce that theory and hope that everyone will be cautioned against this and other kinds of false doctrine. Along with President Spencer W. Kimball and similar statements from others, Elder Bruce R. McConkie made the following statement. The devil keeps his heresy.
Keeps this heresy.
The devil keeps his heresy, Adam God theory, alive as a means of obtaining converts to cultism. It is contrary to the whole plan of salvation set forth in the scriptures, and anyone who has read the book of Moses and anyone who has received the temple endowment has no excuse whatever for being led astray by it. Those who are so ensnared reject the living prophet and close their ears to the apostles of their day. Ironically, Elder McConkie's June 1980 condemnation asks you to trust him and President Kimball as today's living prophet. Further, McConkie is pointing to the endowment ceremony as a source of factual information. What about the saints of Brigham's day who were following their living prophet? And what about the endowment ceremony of their day where Adam God was being taught at the veil? Yesterday's doctrine is today's false doctrine, and yesterday's prophet is today's heretic.
Yeah, so yeah, I think Adam God theory was one that like I genuinely hadn't heard of until I read this. Like,
Yeah.
it's one of those things. It seems like one of the issues with the current church is that the church in Salt Lake, the main LDS church, is Brigham's church, essentially. So it's like, because Brigham Young moved all the saints out west to where they could practice their religion freely and whatnot, like, they're very grateful for that, but also he just said some outlandish things that they now have to like try and explain away or whatever.
Didn't Brigham Young own like a brewery or a
Distilleries, yeah. He owned like everything when they were first here. Like, but yes, they specifically they did have distilleries where they were making whiskey and other types of alcohol.
And alcohol is like absolutely prohibited in the church.
Yeah.
Like, you can't go to the temple if you're drinking alcohol, and you have to go to the temple in order to make it to the celestial kingdom to live with God forever. So
Yeah, but very much so earlier on, the word of wisdom was treated how it's phrased. The beginning of the word of wisdom says sent by, not by command or constraint, but basically as like general recommendations for your health.
yeah.
And so that's how they treated it early on, and that's why some of the branch offs, whether it be the fundamentalists or whoever, treat it that way too, and they may drink or they may use tobacco products or whatever. They usually have a problem where things veered from what it was like early on, so then they break off and start their own thing.
Yeah. But just to kind of clarify too, I also never heard of the Adam God theory until I started deconstructing the religion. Because that's not something that's taught, or even like some of the quotes said from more recent prophets, like within before I was born, but within like my parents' lifetime and stuff, where they denounce that theory. I mean, it just goes to show that it's just not something that's taught anymore. And when I heard about it, and especially heard that this was something that was taught in temple ceremonies, which are like a very big deal in the church and very important, and what they call sacred and what I call secretive and cultish, but yeah, it was weird. It was really weird. It was one of the things that got me thinking about, how it's weird that, prophets are supposed to be getting this revelation from God to teach for the church, and people will say that like they're receiving revelation for their time and the people in their time, and that's why it could be different. But I'm like, so racism and something as big as like who God is, and like it just is confusing.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah, and just he pointed this out in this last paragraph, but the fact that McConkie was trying to point people to the endowment ceremony as like a way to understand truth, and it's like, well, at one point, this is what Brigham Young was teaching in the endowment ceremony. And also, even since this quote by McConkie, the endowment ceremony has changed again several times. So it's like they just want it every which way that they can without having to acknowledge that there are contradictions. Like, they are plain as day contradictions. One guy is saying one thing, and then decades later they're saying something completely the opposite, but still somehow trying to reconcile them.
Yeah, and like for me, the biggest thing is that they are big things. It's not,
yeah.
It has nothing to do with the people and their time and like what you should be doing, and how, service is more important right now, and or people need to be, spend more time with your family. It's not things like that. It's big things that are completely different.
Yeah, and that's a good point that you make, that some of these things you can't just reduce to it was their time, because the Adam God theory, it's not as if this was some popular thing being proposed by other people. Even people that were close to Brigham in the leadership of the church were not on board with this. They were not cool with it. This was weird even for his day, and it wasn't something that was culturally influenced. Like, some people will make the argument for the black priesthood ban being a cultural thing. You can't make the same excuse for some of these other things because they weren't common culturally. Other Christians rejected it and called it for what it was.
And two things there is the race and the priesthood ban was not lifted until 1978, which is when my mom was already alive, your parents were alive. They were literally
It's not that long
alive
ago.
during this, and racism is completely, obviously, was never okay, but even culturally is not okay
Yeah.
still. And culturally, the LGBTQ plus community is like being celebrated so much more now than it used to be, and it's not super weird, and people don't have to feel like they have to come out anymore because people are just okay with being themselves. And I think that that's a beautiful thing. And if the church was being like culturally motivated by it, like, wouldn't you think that they would? I mean, I feel like at some point they are gonna make some type of change. I feel like they do little things here and there that kind of like feel like breadcrumbs to
Yeah.
maybe accepting people like that at some point, but I think it's gonna be way too late when it happens, just like race in the priesthood.
Yeah, that's kind of like the benefit of being able to study the history and like study it with regular US history that was going on at the time. So polygamy, the church eventually denounces it and gets rid of it as a practice because they were getting pressure from the federal government that they wouldn't have statehood if they continued the practice. Then the priesthood ban on black people directly coincides with the civil rights movement of the time, even though it was like late on the tail end of all that. It's very obvious that like societal or cultural pressures that are put on the church is what's leading to change in a lot of these circumstances, which makes you wonder, again, what good is a prophet if that's just what's going to happen?
Yeah.
And it's more like the prophet's holding it back from happening in some ways.
And for me, that was like, that is and has been the biggest thing for me. That's like, when I was in the church, that was one of the most confusing things for me. That was so hard to, like, I never felt like I was not okay with people who are just not heterosexual finding love. But I felt like God didn't want it to happen, and that's just the reason it was important to follow. But I didn't understand and I didn't agree, but I was like abiding because that's what you're supposed to do. And
Sure, yeah.
Once I got to like the deconstruction and the questioning, and you start talking about the prophets and how they denounce things from previous prophets, I'm over here like, okay, I don't want to be a part of this like anti-gay community just to like be, 80 years old and find out that they, like, now if you're transgender or whatever, you can make it into the celestial kingdom. And my whole life I was against it. Like, I would rather spend my whole life like true and authentic to what I believe is right and what feels good to me. And I feel like if there is a God and he's described as, this all loving, and we're his children, and he knows our thoughts and he knows everything, like, he would understand that like I was doing what genuinely felt right to me, and where this organization was teaching me that they were right and they had the way, and this is where you need to be because this is the true church that God is communicating through. I no longer felt that what was being taught was authentic to what that description of an all-loving God would do or be.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm going away from it, because it doesn't feel right to me. It feels icky, it feels wrong. Anyway, that was my big thing, and I'm sure there were people who disagreed with the race thing too, but genuinely just believed that if you had darker skin, you were less than and more sinful, and that you couldn't go to heaven. And like, I could see people seeing the church teach these things and be like, dude, like, my best friend is black, like, and she can't make it because of that. Like, I could see that, but they're following because that's what they're told, and now they're 80 and like, dude, like, and that's where I feel like my thing is with the LGBTQ plus community. That was my big thing, where it's like, I just really disagree. It just feels very like hateful.
Yeah, I mean, multiple generations of people in the church could have like poisoned their minds and their views about people of African descent wherever they were, if they believed as Mormons what they were taught, like viewing these friends and neighbors and coworkers or whatever as less than, or as less righteous, or any of the terms that they've used. It's even been thrown around that they were like indecisive in the premortal existence, so they weren't. So essentially generations that grew up believing this had their views about other human beings poisoned for no reason. So yeah, I largely agree with that.
I was in the middle of reading the Blacks ban section. So let's see, that's 1, 2, wait.
Yeah, this is a different section.
Did we not read this one
We
yet?
didn't read that one yet.
Okay, so that's not that long, right?
It's not
we
too
just
bad.
we just got into like a whole different
It was
thing.
just other commentary we were adding.
Well, we should still try and talk about some of the things we talked about, because
Yeah.
if we can remember how our minds even got there. Okay, I'm gonna restart this Blacks ban section. As you know, for close to 130 years, blacks were not only banned from holding the priesthood, but black individuals and black families were blocked from the saving ordinances of the temple. Every single prophet, from Brigham Young all the way to Harold B. Lee, kept this ban in place. Prophets, seers, and revelators of 2013 in the church's December 2013 Race and the Priesthood essay disavowed the theories of yesterday's prophets, seers, and revelators for their theological, institutional, and doctrinal racist teachings and revelation. Yesterday's racist doctrine and revelation is now today's disavowed theories. Additionally, the above-mentioned essay also withdraws that black skin is a sign of divine disfavor or curse, while ironically contradicting the Book of Mormon itself. 2 Nephi chapter 5 verse 21 says, And he had caused the cursing to come upon them, yea, even a sore cursing, because of their iniquity. For behold, they had hardened their hearts against him, and they had become like unto a flint. Wherefore, as they were white and exceedingly fair and delightsome, that they might not be enticing unto my people, the Lord did cause a skin of blackness to come upon them. Joseph Smith permitted the priesthood to at least 2 black men. Elijah Abel was one of them, Walker Lewis was another. So Joseph Smith gives the priesthood to blacks, Brigham Young bans blacks. Each and every single one of the 10 prophets from Brigham Young to Harold B. Lee supported what Spencer W. Kimball referred to as a possible error in the teachings of Spencer W. Kimball, pages 448 to 449. Heavenly Father likes blacks enough to give them the priesthood under Joseph Smith, but he decides they are not okay when Brigham Young shows up. And he still doesn't think they're okay for the next 130 years and the next 9 prophets until President Kimball decides to get a revelation. The same God who denieth none that come unto him, black and white, bond and free, male and female, is the same God who denied blacks from the saving ordinances of the temple for 130 years. Yet he apparently changed his mind again in 1978 about black people. Of course, the revelation he gives to the brethren in the Salt Lake Temple on June 1st, 1978 has absolutely nothing to do with the IRS potentially revoking BYU's tax-exempt status, Stanford and other universities boycotting BYU athletics, and we can't figure out who's black or not in Brazil. These are all links that you can click on in the PDF version of the CES letter, which will be linked in the description. Sao Paulo temple dedicated / opened just a few months after Revelation, and the post-civil rights societal trends were against the church's racism. I would think Christ's one true church would have led the civil rights movement, not the last major church on the planet in 1978 to adopt it. How can we trust these prophets, seers, and revelators who have been so wrong about so many important things for so long, while claiming to be receiving revelations from God? Yesterday's doctrine is today's false doctrine. Yesterday's 10 prophets are today's heretics.
Yeah, so I don't know if this got caught on our last video or not, if I talked about this during that section, but basically this can undermine the entire notion that prophets have some unique, special, powerful connection to God. Like if God's church now is disavowing these theories just as racist teachings, then that means that the prophets before that were teaching them weren't connected to God in the same way. And so now what are prophets and apostles teaching today that's going to be the disavowed theory in 15 to 20 years? So this is just like one of those things where when you start to examine like why this is such a big deal to people who have deconstructed or left or whatever, it's pretty obvious that this is just people, most of them very old men, who probably have their own like biases and stuff baked in from a lifetime on this planet, trying to lead a church. But yeah, to me, it's just like very obvious. They don't have some unique, special connection to God. They don't have some, they don't have any prophetic, I guess, foresight into the future. I couldn't name one prophecy that I've heard that was like anything unique or that any leader of the church has ever made. But then you have obvious examples like this of them just directly contradicting each other because of pressures put on them from the outside culture or society.
Yeah, I remember after I finished reading this prior, when the recording had stopped, you started talking about how you were taught when it comes to race and the priesthood, and just the ban and what you were taught about it.
Yes, okay, that's good. I'm glad you remembered that. So yeah, it talks about how leaders today talk about it as a disavowed theory, which is very strong language to say that like that's wrong. We don't believe that. That was always wrong, kind of thing. However, you don't have to go back that far to not have it viewed as a disavowed teaching. Even me growing up in primary and early on in young men's, I was taught that we didn't know why God put the ban there in the first place. It was still God's decision. It wasn't Brigham Young going rogue or the prophets like being influenced by their own culture and upbringing at the time. That's a newer theory that's being thrown around. That's the newer teaching. I remember being taught that we didn't know why God made that decision and why it took so long for him to give the revelation to lift it. And I loved your very sarcastic tone as you were saying, like, it probably had nothing to do with the IRS, like, because that's probably how Jeremy Reynolds was writing the letter. Like, very obviously, things happen externally that puts pressure on the church when there's something nefarious going on, and that's what forces them to change.
And I was taught a similar thing about the priesthood ban and how, or like blacks in the priesthood ban. Sorry, my mind just went in like 4 different directions, and then I was like trying to figure out which path to go down. But yeah, I was taught that it was something from like back in the day, and it's not something that we believe in now because that was racist, and we are not racist. God is not racist. Black and white, bond and free, all are welcome unto God. We're all his children, right? But the difficult thing for me as I've gotten older is like, why hasn't something this huge been something that the church has apologized for? And like, why can't you just take accountability for your actions and apologize? I feel like that could go a long way for so many people, especially black people who are interested and want to join the church. It's like, and I'm pretty sure it was President, or could you say President Holland? Can you call him president? He's in the presidency.
Sure.
Anyway, I'm pretty sure he has a talk somewhere where he said that the church is never going to apologize for anything that they say up there at that pulpit, because it's from God. And even things from the past that are difficult for us today, or that we cannot understand, that we have to choose to have faith that God knows what he's doing. And so where some people are saying it's disavowed, other people are saying like it was that way for a reason, even though it was horrible.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, another common thing you'll hear, and I think you've heard this from conversations with your family, I've heard it from people talking about like being careful to not judge. I've heard this in a lot of debates I've watched too, to not judge like the past. The term is presentism, like judging the past based on what we now presently know about society, about the world. Well, the problem is, I get the argument, like that's technically like a good framework to have when looking at the past. However, if your claim is that Jesus Christ is actually leading this church, that these men actually have an open line of communication with God, then that shouldn't affect your church. Your church should withstand the test of being looked at with presentism. It should be very obvious that the church was ahead of the curve on certain things, that Christ is actually preparing the world for his coming, kind of thing. It shouldn't matter that if you look back through the church's history with, you know, a fine-tooth comb, that like it should withstand that test if it is what it claims to be.
Mm-hmm. And I can't remember if I said this while the camera was recording or not, but I want to make it clear that this is one of the big comparisons to something that was so difficult for me growing up, is how the church is completely against anything other than one man and one woman getting married. So any other type of relationship dynamic, whatever genders are getting together, whatever, just the homophobia, I guess, is what you can use, was so confusing for me growing up. And even though I didn't understand it, I still abided by that, and I still stood up for that vocally, like when I talked about my beliefs with other people on why I believed that like there shouldn't be anything other than a relationship between a man and a woman, because it's what God wanted, even though I didn't understand and it didn't make sense to me. And because like I'm sure that there are people who grew up during this time of the church and the racism and all of this, where people are like, I have a coworker who's black and I love her to death, and I can't stand to think of the fact that she can't even go to the celestial kingdom and be with God. I'm sure there are people who faithfully like believed these things and went with them without understanding and being confused and hurt by it. And now there's people who are, you know, you don't have to be that old now to have been experienced this.
Oh yeah.
Like your mom was alive through this, like our grandparents were alive through this. There's people today who are like, I faithfully stood by this belief and spoke racism out into the world because I thought it's what God wanted.
Yeah.
And even though it was confusing for me and it was hard, and now they are adults wishing that they could have lived their life being kind to people of color. And that's how I am with the church in this instance. I'm like, I don't want to be 80 and look back realizing I lived this like homophobic lifestyle and had all of these beliefs just for the church to be like way late in the game and change it, and due to cultural pressures and whatnot. Because I'm like, sure, if you were to try and get into BYU and you said anything about being homophobic, that they probably wouldn't even admit you into the school. I've heard people having to like lie about certain things in order to get in, or that you have to go through like interview processes to even graduate. And there were people who, one of the questions is, are you doing things regularly to continue to grow and strengthen your testimony in Jesus Christ and his leaders and
Yeah.
your leaders, and they ask you this like as your like final interview for graduation, and people were
Graduating
like
from college.
people were saying
Wild.
that they had to like lie and just say yes in fear that they wouldn't be able to graduate.
Sure.
So I'm sure that there's going to be, you know, the cultural pressure down the line, but I am not going to live my life homophobic just to find out it was not what God wanted. And that was something that was so, I mean, that was one of the freeing things that I experienced in leaving the church, knowing that I can be truly authentic to me and follow what I believe is right, and where I don't know if there is a God or not. I feel like if there is one, and he is this all-loving, you know, you're all my children, though, like, if that version of God exists, that like he would know, or it would know, or she would know, or whatever, the creator would know that I did my absolute best to do what I felt was right, and where I felt like this organization was wrong and homophobic and racist and has false prophets and is teaching these horrible things, I didn't want to be a part of it because I did not believe. And even if at some point in some period of time that was the church that the creator wanted people to have, whatever, that I'm pretty damn sure it's not what it is today.
Yeah,
like,
maybe Brigham Young really did drive it off the rails.
I
Crashed and burned. Who knows?
I'm just like I mean, I believe that Joseph Smith wasn't like as racist as some people say. I mean, he married people of color. He like gave the priesthood to people of color, and there was all these things, right?
Not to say he didn't have his own faults, but yes.
Oh yeah,
I do get what you're saying.
I mean, he's the reason I left. So
I'm just throwing that back out
I think he was manipulative and deceitful and potentially schizophrenic. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a good way to recap it. It's just one of those things where I've seen a lot of apologetics about the priesthood ban, about the language used in 2nd Nephi, about a skin of blackness, and the apologetics will say, well, they didn't mean like skin, they meant countenance, or they meant animal skins, like what they were actually wearing and whatever. I've heard some wild ones. But if you are somebody that is just reading the text without an apologist talking in your ear through the scripture, you're gonna read that and know what it means.
Oh yeah.
And then whether you're a racist person or not, if you believe the book and you believe the teachings, you're going to start looking at people differently under that framework. You're baking in racism into future generations by not acknowledging that it is just blatant, pure racism in the actual scripture itself.
And there's like a commercial, I don't know if it's a commercial or like a TV, I think it was a commercial, where that the church released about how your skin gets whiter if you
Back in like the 80s.
And I'll actually find the clip and I'll screen record it and put it on the video, and we can like pause our talking and just like have it play really quick. But that's a horrible clip, and I shared it in my Instagram stories yesterday, and someone from like one of my old wards, she was actually one of my primary teachers, sent me a message on Facebook and was like, that's not true. And I was like, in my mind, I'm like, of course it's not fucking true. Like, but the church released it.
we don't believe that it's true. We're pointing out that it's nonsense.
And so I was just like, what's not true? Because I'm sure she's gonna say like, oh, we don't believe this, or it's not, whatever. But something that I mentioned when the recording stopped that I feel like is also something I want to bring up is that this is just one of the examples of the horrible things that have been taught in the church or in the scriptures that is teaching and guiding people to do horrible things. There's so much violence and racism and just discrimination of all kinds in the scriptures. And the Book of Mormon starts that way, where Nephi is a prophet and he's sent by God, and he says, I will go and do the things the Lord commanded, to go get these golden plates that Laban has. And Laban is another man where these plates have been passed down in his family through generations. This is his family, like, heirloom.
Yeah, Laban's in charge. It's his possession, basically.
And all of a sudden, knock, knock, knock on his door. Here comes Nephi being like, hey, God told me to give you these plates. He's like, dude, these are mine. Like, I'm not going to give them to you. He gives him 3 chances and then says God commanded him to kill him. He chops off his head and takes the plates, and he dresses up in Laban's clothes and pretends to be Laban and talks to Laban's people and his kingdom, or whatever you want to call it. And I'm like, what kind of psycho stuff? Why are people saying this is a faith promoting story? Why are you trying to twist horrible psychotic things into faith promoting stories? Growing up and hearing things like this in the scriptures, I had children's versions of the Book of Mormon in the Bible where I was reading these stories, and that's where I got a lot of my insight on violence and racism and horrible things that exist in the world. And my mom would talk about how this is stuff from the past and these were different times and all of this stuff, and I'm like, I don't care what the times were. Like, it's never okay to do that. And in my mind, it's promoting that it's okay, that violence is okay when God commands you to do it. And it's like, that's why we have people out here freaking murdering people.
It's okay to kill someone if they have something that you really, really want.
Yeah, and I get that some people are gonna say, like, okay, who's gonna actually be twisted into thinking that way? Like, you have to already be messed up if you think that way. And I'm just like, because I kind of think about it where people are like, oh, parents will be like, stop doing all your lefty propaganda gay stuff because you're going to make my kid think they're gay. And I'm like, dude, if your kid thinks they're gay, they're just going to, that's because they're gay. Just gay. Like, yeah. And so I get like that comparison where like, if like this person's just violent and they're taking this. But in my mind, like, I genuinely believed that like I would do anything for God, and that like that God could command people to do just about anything. And I made like the comparison to the biblical story of Abraham and to go kill his son or sacrifice your son. And then God's like, oh, well, just kidding, don't do it.
Prank.
And I'm just like, and I had a family member call me recently and talk about this story with tears in his eyes, and you can hear welting in his throat, saying like, if you knew God commanded you and was telling you to do this with your own children, and like he wouldn't actually make you do it. It's just testing your faith or whatever. And I'm like, no, that's absolutely fucked up. Yeah, please bleep my F-bombs.
My answer wouldn't be, yes, I'll do it, and then he wouldn't make me. The answer would be, I'm not gonna fucking do that.
Yeah.
Like, this is my kid. I'm not walking them up, putting them on an altar as if I'm about to chop them up.
Yeah, and it's like there's so much. It's like there's an extent of belief that goes way too far. And the Book of Mormon is full of promoting violence. And I know there's going to be people who are like, it's also full of God condemning people for being violent, or full of God being loving and saying that you shouldn't be violent and thou shalt not kill and all of these things. I'm like, yeah, do you see how everything contradicts and how
everything has an opposite position?
Yeah, and it's all in there. Give me one good, positive thing about the church that you believe, and I will show you that the exact opposite teaching is also in the Book of Mormon or Bible or said from the prophets.
One prophet said it, another said the opposite. You'll find it. Carrying on, so the next section here is blood atonement. So, along with Adam God, Brigham taught a doctrine known as blood atonement, where a person's blood has to be shed to atone for their own sins, as it was beyond the atonement of Jesus Christ. And here's the quote from him about it. There are sins that men commit for which they cannot receive forgiveness in this world, or in that which is to come. And if they had their eyes open to see their true condition, they would be perfectly willing to have their blood spilt upon the ground, that the smoke thereof might ascend to heaven as an offering for their sins, and the smoking incense would atone for their sins. Whereas, if such is not the case, they will stick to them and remain upon them in the spirit world. I know when you hear my brethren telling about cutting people off from the earth, that you consider it strong doctrine, but it is to save them, not to destroy them. And furthermore, I know that there are transgressors who, if they knew themselves and the only condition upon which they can obtain forgiveness, would beg of their brethren to shed their blood, that the smoke thereof might ascend to God as an offering to appease the wrath that is kindled against them, and that the law might have its course. I will say further, I have had men come to me and offer their lives to atone for their sins. It is true that the blood of the Son of God was shed for sins through the fall and those committed by men, yet men can commit sins which it can never remit. There are sins that can be atoned for by an offering upon an altar, as in ancient days, and there are sins that the blood of a lamb or a calf or the turtle dove cannot remit, but they must be atoned for by the blood of the man. Journal of Discourses.
Whoa, I have never heard the comparison to Jesus Christ shedding blood and dying for the sins. He wasn't dying for his sins.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be for the world so that they didn't have to.
Yeah.
And this is like just one of those things. I've been like having just like, I feel like breadcrumbs dropped lately, like just of truly how I'm understanding more about Christians who are upset with Mormons calling themselves Christian, which again, for me with labels, like I don't really care. You can call yourself whatever you want. But I'm starting to understand what they mean and why it's frustrating because of the things that have been taught in the church and how it like is completely against like the core Christian. You don't just have to believe in Jesus Christ. It's like that he died for your sins, and it's like, I mean, different branches of Christianity will have different like specifications, but it's like that's so against it. Like, I don't get how he's using that as a comparison.
Because whether or not you believe in the New Testament or about who Jesus was or what he did, that's going to make any Christian's stomach churn when they hear this, because they view the atonement as all-encompassing. It was sort of a once-for-all sacrifice God to his people to be able to allow everybody to be reconciled and saved. So the fact that you now have this guy talking about like, well, there's some things that people can do where they have to spill their own blood. Number one, that's effed, and like, but also that super minimizes the atonement in the eyes of Christians, because Christians view it as such a big thing that that's a minimizing statement about it.
It's also glorifying self-harm.
Yeah.
Like, and this is like a really like vulnerable thing to say, but like when I was in high school, I would feel like I had to do that when I got in trouble, or if I did things that I felt like were wrong or sinful, or my parents like scolded me for things, I felt like I needed to do something like that, and it would like give me relief that like that I gave myself a punishment for what I did, and it made me feel better because like I don't have to feel bad about it anymore because I've been punished, like, which is so fucked. Sorry, can you believe that? sorry.
No. Yeah, so and the weird thing is you would read a quote like this talking about like having to spill your own blood, and you're like, well, who would go along with that? Like, but to the saints that really believed like these stories, and at that point like had so much invested in it, like there's probably very few things they wouldn't do to like be in good standing and whatnot. So to hear things like this, like, to us it's insane. Even as like an active believing member, had I been told this, I would be like, okay, well, that's an insane thing that Brigham Young said. Like,
yeah. I kind of felt like it was important to mention that too, that modern people within the church would say, no, that's absolutely crazy, we don't do that, we don't teach that. Like, their stomachs could churn hearing that a previous prophet taught this. Like, I'm sure there's plenty of people who've never heard of this before, because it's not something that's taught or talked about. But it's like just another example in my mind of like why you shouldn't take the prophet's word so seriously.
And then there's an update here that the church now confirms in its Peace and Violence Among 19th Century Latter-day Saints essay that blood atonement was taught by the prophet Brigham Young. As with the Adam God theory, the blood atonement doctrine was later declared false by subsequent prophets and apostles. The final line here is really good. Yesterday's doctrine is today's false doctrine. Yesterday's prophet is today's heretic. So it's, you never know where the church is going to go. And this for me was like one of the first like issues, like, because I took sort of like a more broad view of like priesthood authority and like whether the priesthood is even a reality at all, and like, should we even submit to that authority without having good reason to do so?
We talked about this in our Faith Crisis Part 1 video. It was the very first video that I put out there when we started having questions and concerns. We were still active believing members, but we were like, okay. And by the end of the video, I was like, my husband doesn't want to call it this, but I'm having a faith crisis, or we're in a faith crisis. And I think you didn't want to call it that. I can't remember exactly why, but I was like, that's how it feels to me, is what I'm experiencing. But in that video, Colin talks a little bit more in depth about why he started questioning the priesthood and different things that have gone on with people who are supposedly have this authority from God, and why maybe we shouldn't trust them as much as we're taught to. I'll put that in the cards and in the description box below.
Sweet. So this is, this is a quick section on polygamy, and our whole last video was on that, so we can probably just breeze through this real quick. Brigham Young taught that the doctrine of polygamy is required for exaltation. The only men who become gods, even the sons of God, are those who enter into polygamy. That's from the Journal of Discourses. Several other prophets after Young, including Taylor, Woodruff, Snow, and Joseph F. Smith, gave similar teachings that the new and everlasting covenant of plural marriage was doctrinal and essential for exaltation. It's even in the scriptures. D&C 132 verse 4, "For behold, I reveal unto you a new and everlasting covenant, and if ye abide not in that covenant, then are ye damned. For no one can reject this covenant and be permitted to enter into my glory."
Oh my gosh.
So that still is there.
I wonder if it will say, like, I'm like curious to open the chapter and see what some of the verses before and after say. Just because that's like really strong wording. So I want to see how like the polygamy doctrine is worded, like how they say it specifically, because I've heard that some people who are in the FLDS community, which was a branch off after Joseph Smith, they didn't like, I think, how Brigham.
Well, no. It was after that, I'm pretty sure, because
really?
The Saints had already been out west. That's why they're here. We live in southern Utah, and the FLDS Church is not that far from.
Yeah, their community is
like an hour-ish, something like that.
Well, there's,
they're all over the place,
some,
but
like,
I mean the main community of the FLDS Church.
But yeah, I've heard people who have left that community share that it was taught that they had to have at least 3 wives in order to make it into the highest degree of the celestial kingdom.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
And plenty of them have like tens of wives, and I'm pretty sure their prophet who's in prison now, I'm drawing a blank on his name, FLDS prophet?
Warren Jeffs.
Warren Jeffs. He had like
So many.
more than Joseph Smith, I think.
More, and he had younger wives, and a very messy situation. There's this documentary, I think, on Netflix about that. But what was I gonna say? I lost my train of thought.
Sorry.
Um,
What's the documentary called again? In case people are, it has that blonde girl in it, and she was also on a Mormon Stories episode.
I want to say it might be Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey.
Something like
I
that.
think that might be what it's called.
What's the one on Hulu we watched?
Under the Banner of Heaven.
Those are good ones.
Which is another, that's another good one, because that one like shows, and
Blood Atonement.
it's based on a real story, but it just kind of shows that like somebody that was a believing member of the church gets a hold of or gets wrapped up in some of the more fundamentalist ideas and where it leads.
Yeah, it's crazy. I should watch that again.
But yeah, I mean, this is strong language in that verse. If you abide not in the covenant, then you are damned. So you're damned for it. And it's also like you can't be permitted to enter into my glory. So
yeah, and no one can reject it.
Yeah, this is this next quote is from a pretty famous interview. I don't know, your editors might even be able to put the actual clip, but it was an interview with Larry King that President Hinckley did, and he was asked about polygamy. So Larry King asked, "You condemn it?" Talking about polygamy, and President said, "I condemn it, yes, as a practice, because I think it is not doctrinal." Contrary to President Hinckley's statement, we still have Doctrine and Covenants 132 in our canonized scriptures. We also still practice plural marriage in the temples by permitting men to be sealed to more than one woman, so long as only one is living. Apostles Elder Oaks, Elder Perry, Elder Nelson are modern examples of LDS polygamists in that they are sealed to multiple women. Polygamy is doctrinal. Polygamy is not doctrinal. Yesterday's doctrine is today's false doctrine. Yesterday's prophets are today's heretics. Okay, so I think there also is a documentary about this. I can't remember what it's called, but if we look it up and we can find it, we'll include that in the description as well. This is the Mark Hofmann section. In the early to mid 1980s, the church paid hundreds of thousands of dollars in expensive and valuable antiquities and cash to Mark Hofmann, a con man and soon-to-be serial killer, to purchase and suppress bizarre and embarrassing documents in the church vaults that undermined and threatened the church's story of its origins. The documents were later proven to be forgeries. And you can see, like, I think that's Gordon B. Hinckley. You can see some of the leaders of the church here with Mark Hofmann. Anyways, the lack of discernment by the brethren on such a grave threat to the church is troubling. Speeches by Dallin H. Oaks and President Gordon B. Hinckley offered apologetic explanations for the troubling documents. The documents were the Salamander Letter and the Joseph Smith III Blessing, that later ended up, unbeknownst to Elder Oaks and President Hinckley at the time of their apologetic talks, being proven complete fake and forgeries. The following is Elder Oaks' 1985 defense of the fake Salamander Letter, which Oaks evidently thought was real and legitimate at the time he gave this address. Another source of differences in the accounts of different witnesses is the different meanings that different persons attach to words. We have vivid illustration of this in the recent media excitement about the word salamander in a letter Martin Harris is supposed to have sent to W. Phelps over 150 years ago. All of the scores of media stories on that subject apparently assume that the author of that letter used the word salamander in the modern sense of a tailed amphibian. One wonders why so many writers neglected to reveal that to their readers that there is another meaning of salamander, which may even have been the primary meaning in the context in the 1820s That meaning, which is listed second in a current edition of Webster's New World Dictionary, is a spirit supposed to live in fire. Modern and ancient literature contain many examples of this usage. A spirit that is able to live in fire is a good approximation of the description Joseph Smith gave of the angel Moroni, a personage in the midst of a light whose countenance was truly like lightning and whose overall appearance was glorious beyond description. As Joseph Smith wrote later, the first sight of this personage was as though the house was filled with a consuming fire. Since the letter purports only to be Martin Harris's interpretation of what he had heard about Joseph's experience, the use of the words white salamander and old spirit seem understandable. In view of all this, and as a matter of intellectual evaluation, why all the excitement in the media and why the apparent hand-wringing among those who profess friendship with the membership in the church, the media should make more complete disclosures, but Latter-day Saint readers should also be more sophisticated in their evaluation of what they read. So what just happened? Elder Oaks defended and rationalized a completely fake and made-up document that Mark Hofmann created while telling Latter-day Saint readers to be more sophisticated in their evaluation of what they read.
Ooh.
So did you know about this?
No, I've never heard this before.
Yeah, so essentially Mark Hofmann made up these documents, which it was an interesting angle he took. He took, instead of coming up with a fake cool thing about church history, it was this is stuff that's gonna really negatively impact church history. So then the church wanted to buy it so that they could suppress it or whatever. And then it turned out later that they were fakes, but Elder Oaks and Hinckley gave addresses in conference before they realized they were forgeries, treating them as if they were real.
It just goes to show once again that people will do anything if they think it's from. It's why not just do, why have the organizations?
Yeah.
Why not just do what feels right to you?
Yeah, everybody's got to kind of figure it out on their own. And I guess, too, if your own story is the way that you do it is as a member of the church, that's fine too. It just, to me, seems like the church doesn't provide anything unique in terms of being able to find spirituality or God, however you want to label it.
Yeah.
It's very obviously riddled with a lot of errors.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the story gets crazier. So there was significant dishonesty by President Hinckley on his relationship with Hofmann, his meetings, and which documents that the church had and didn't have. Just hours following the bombings on the morning of October 15th, 1985, murderer Mark Hofmann met with Dallin H. Oaks in the church office building. And this is a quote from a book about the incident. He just killed 2 people, and what does he do? He goes down to the church office building and meets with Dallin Oaks. I can't imagine the rush, given Hoffman's frame of reference, that this would have given him to be there standing in front of one of God's appointed apostles after murdering 2 people, and this person doesn't hear any words from God, doesn't intuit a thing. For Hofmann, that must have been an absolute rush. He had pulled off the ultimate spoof against God.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah, so this guy set off some bombs and killed 2 people.
Can you say that on YouTube? I don't
blur any words that we need to. You review the footage. Yeah, that's true.
I don't know how much we can even put on. I don't know if you can say stuff like that.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
That's true.
It might be
I'm
community
quoting.
guy.
I'm quoting just for the record.
We could even okay, maybe we'll screenshot. Oh wait, but he doesn't even use that word. You did.
Unaliver, right in front of him in his office.
You can say that. I just mean some of the specifics and how things happened. I just wonder how much. You can say that, that's fine.
Elder Oaks had a serial murderer right in front of him in his office just hours after Hofmann killed 2 people. Oaks later admits to this meeting. What does this say about the discernment of the brethren when they can't discern a murderer and a con man, hell-bent on destroying Mormonism right under their noses? Ultimately, the church was forced to admit it had, in the first presidency vault documents, McClellan collection that the church previously denied it had. The McClellan documents were critical for the investigation of the Hofmann murders. While these prophets, seers, and revelators were being duped and conned by Hofmann's forgeries over a 4-year period, the Tanners, considered some of the biggest critics of the church, actually came out and said that the Salamander letter was fake, even when the Salamander letter proved very useful in discrediting the church. The Tanners had better discernment than the Brethren did. While the Tanners publicly rejected the Salamander letter, the church continued buying fakes from Hofmann, and Elder Oaks continued telling Latter-day Saints to be more sophisticated.
Oh my gosh. Ew. You know, you just read through this and I'm like, I'm so glad I am not there anymore.
Yeah.
It's like people are freaking blind.
Yeah, it's a wild...
I mean, I'm gonna give, like, what's it called? Like, cut
Praise.
people some slack in the sense that, like, I'd never heard these things before. A lot of them. Like, they're obviously not talked about.
Most of them I hadn't.
Anyway, do you want me to carry on?
This is like the very last section
that
we're going through.
I'm told that prophets are just men who are only prophets when acting as such, whatever that means. I'm told that like all prophets, Brigham Young was a man of his time. For example, I was told that Brigham Young was acting as a man when he taught that God revealed to him that Adam is our father and God, and the only God with whom we have to do. Never mind that Brigham taught this over the pulpit in not one but 2 conferences, and never mind that he introduced this theology. Did I say that right?
Theology.
Okay. Let me restart this sentence. Never mind that Brigham taught this over the pulpit in not one but 2 conferences, and never mind that he introduced this theology into the endowment ceremony in temples. Never mind that Brigham Young made it clear that he was speaking as a prophet. Quote, I have never yet preached a sermon and sent it out to the children of men that they may not call scripture. Why would I want my kids chanting, follow the prophet, with such a ridiculous and inconsistent 187-year track record? What credibility do the brethren have? Why would I want them following the prophet when a prophet is just a man of his time, teaching his theories that will likely be disavowed by future prophets, seers, and revelators? If his moral blueprint is not much better than that of their Sunday school teachers, if historically speaking, the doctrine he teaches today will likely be tomorrow's false doctrine. If Brigham Young was really a prophet, seer, and revelator, would it not be unreasonable to expect that God would give him a hint that racism is not okay, sexism is not okay, blood atonement is not okay, and God's name is not Adam? It's infuriating how much I agree with it.
Yeah, it's that's kind of like the mic drop at the end of the section, because like we were saying before, if the church is what it claims to be, you would expect a higher standard to hold them to. If they are just products, men of their time, you know, the culture is what influences them to make the decisions they make, what's the need for them? Why do I need to go to a church and listen to these people try and figure it out when I can just do it on myself? Like, I don't. Doesn't make sense.
I even understand like communities and organizations. Like, I think people need community, and when you find people who have similar beliefs to you, it can feel very good to surround yourself by people who are like you. I think that's very common. I just don't like the, you know, this is what God says and this is what you have to do and this is it. It's like, if people want to get up and say, you know, this is how I feel and this is what I believe, if you resonate with it, then great. And if you don't, that you don't have to feel any type of pressure to believe what they're saying.
Yeah, and I mean, not to minimize that at all, because church community can make all the difference in the world. I know for like my family growing up, there was plenty of times where the church community really supported our family and it meant a lot to us, still does. But it seems as though community is really the only thing that is like valuable or important in the church, in my opinion, anymore. Like, and so I mean, I get the people that say that they don't believe anymore, but they go for community, or they, you know, I totally understand that perspective too. It just seems obvious that that's probably all that it has to offer.
Well, I think the next CES Letter video we'll be doing is talking about the Kinderhook plates.
Yeah, it's a short section. We may do a couple sections next video.
All right, well, we might just do the next couple that come after that one. If you like this video and you haven't seen any of our previous CES Letter videos, make sure you go to that playlist and you watch those too, and leave a comment and let us know if you like them, or if you disagree with anything, like put it in there.
Tell us where we were wrong.
Yeah, we are fully open to, you know, making a video and saying, hey, we talked about this and someone commented this and we think they have a really good point, and we wanted to bring that perspective onto, because we do a lot of responding to comment type things too. And so the more you guys comment, the more it gives us to be able to do another responding to comments video. And we include usernames and everything, and we do good comments or nice comments and mean comments, and we do all that. So
yeah, and people have provided like resources in their comments and been like, well, have you read this? Have you read this? I don't always get to them like right away, but we will actually try and like look into that and respond to it. So
yeah.
Yep.
If you made it all the way to the end of the video, I almost had a rock emoji. I was like, what if Android doesn't have rocks? I feel like hearts are the only ones that I know.
Most emojis Androids also have. They just look different.
Okay, if you made it to the end of the video, pick any happy face emoji that you want and include it in your comment in the description. Or if you only want to comment that, do it. It helps us know how long we should make these videos and if people are watching to the end. And yeah, love you guys. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Bye.